Live from our nation's capital, it's Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Welcome to Deadline DC. Every week on Deadline DC, we blaze a clear trail, or at least try to blaze a clear trail through the thick fog of utter chaos and complete confusion that envelops American politics. Hi, I'm Brad Bannon, the host of Deadline DC. I'm a national Democratic strategist. I'm a political analyst for News Radio KNX 97.1 in Los Angeles, and a contributor to The Hill in Washington, D.C. Every week on Deadline DC, I talk to the people and players behind the politics and policies that drive our great nation forward, or at least keep it from sliding backwards. Today, we have a really great show for you. Our first guest will be Kenneth Vogel, an investigative reporter from the Washington Bureau of the New York Times and the author of a great book on corruption in American politics, The Devil's Advocates. He's going to talk about among other things, the Trump pardon industry. Then in the second half hour, our guest will be uh, Ethan Rome, who's the executive director of the Emergency Campaign to Support Higher Education, to talk about the Trump administration's attacks on diversity in our nation's colleges and universities. Before we get to our first guest, though, we're going to play this clip, which is Senator Richard Durbin of Illinois, who's the minority whip in the U.S. Senate, talking about a recent Trump action that has financial implications.
There's a disclosure today, and I don't know the source of it here, about a $5 million donation from Big Tobacco that preceded the vaping decision. Reynolds sent along a check for $5 million, and the president switched his position on this. This is ghastly to think that we're allowing this to occur. And here I am, 36 years after passing banning on smoking on airplanes, seeing us introducing a new product and new variations on it to addict our children. For God's sake, is there one person in the administration besides those who've already resigned who will stand up and say, enough, this violates my conscience?
That is Senator Richard Durbin of Illinois, actually referring to an article our guest wrote for the New York Times. Our guest is Kenneth Vogel from the Washington Bureau of the New York Times and the author of a great book called The Devil's Advocates. Ken, welcome back to Deadline DC.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brad.
First, I want you to talk about the story on vaping that Senator Durbin was discussing, which was your story in the New York Times.
Yeah, it's interesting, Brad, because we had actually written a story shortly before this donation came out, and we then covered the donation. But the initial story was about how these big tobacco executives and lobbyists had been very assiduously courting Trump over the years, including going back to his first administration, but then particularly during his 2024 campaign, when there was still like a lot of leeriness in corporate America about Trump. And big tobacco, and particularly Reynolds, through a subsidiary, really threw its weight behind him in a big way, giving $10 million to a super PAC that was supporting his campaign. And then after he was elected, giving to his inaugural committee, continuing to give to another super PAC that was sort of supporting, his agenda and candidates who back his agenda. And what this got them was, really unprecedented access to him, to the point where there were these two Reynolds lobbyists who he called my tobacco guys, and they came to a number of events of his, including that famous Madison Square Garden rally in the month before the election. But they also got a lot of up close and personal, intimate, one-on-one access, where they argued for relaxing the laws related to vaping being the big sort of the next great hope for the tobacco industry to be able to continue to sustain itself economically, as fewer and fewer people actually smoke the traditional combustible cigarettes, as they call them. And so, they've been frustrated that the FDA and other parts of the administration, both the Trump administration and past administrations, had been clamping down on not just cigarettes, but on vaping as, a dangerous thing that was seen as a gateway by the public health community to smoking. So these tobacco lobbyists, along with their tobacco executives, along with their contract lobbyist, Brian Ballard, had scored a meeting with Trump in, I think it was early May, at his golf club in Jupiter, Florida. And they complained about this. They complained about the slowness of the first Saturday in May, the slowness of the FDA to approve these new vape flavors, and also their sort of ineptitude or laxness in clamping down on illegal Chinese vapes that were flooding the market. So in other words, they felt like we can't even market vapes because of these restrictive rules that the government has around vaping, and yet, or we can't market particular types of vapes, like flavored vapes that would potentially appeal to new vapors and not just people who were trying to get off of cigarettes, which has been the traditional argument for vapes. And so they were arguing that the FDA had really hamstrung them. And at this lunch at his golf course in Jupiter, Florida, Trump actually picks up the phone and calls then FDA Commissioner Marty Makary to essentially yell at him, but he doesn't pick up the phone. Makary doesn't, so he gets patched through to voicemail. And then Trump calls RFK Jr., the Health and Human Services Secretary, obviously, and Mehmet Oz, the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and gives them an earful about this. Well, within a few days, the FDA turns around and says, actually, we will approve some of these flavored vapes for at least one company. We'll approve some of these applications. And then a few days after that, the FDA commissioner, Marty Makary, quits, in part because he told people around him that he was upset by this decision, which he thought flew in the face of public health and science and data. And so we had written that story, and then the Federal Election Commission reports come out for the Trump Super PAC. It's called MAGA Inc. And we see that just 2 days before, maybe it was even one day before the meeting with Trump at the golf course, they had given another $5 million Reynolds had to this Trump Super PAC that probably set the stage for this meeting, which then set the stage for this phone call, which probably set the stage for the FDA decision and the FDA commissioners being forced out under, against his sort of objections over the direction of vape policy. So it was sort of a remarkable chain of events. And what it showed us was a couple things. Number one, just another example of the transactionalism of the president and of his administration, their willingness to sort of bend over backwards for big donors, even when the things that these donors are seeking were in some ways regarded as anathema to public health and public interest. And then it also showed that after decades of being on the defensive, Big Tobacco has found a friend in Trump, and they found an ability to exploit this transactionalism that I just discussed to get their way in a way that they really hadn't for decades, when they'd been essentially just, playing defense against increasing federal regulations and federal legislation to clamp down on tobacco and on vapes as, a public health menace. Well, Trump was willing to find it in his find it in his heart to give them a concession that could be quite lucrative. And it's probably not a coincidence that he did so after yet another donation from from a subsidiary of Reynolds.
Now, this isn't the only instance of this kind of transactional policy making. You've written over the last couple of years about a number of Trump policy decisions that have been that have coincided with big donations to Trump or Republican campaign committees. So, would you say this is part of the pattern?
Yeah, I think we've seen a willingness of Trump to, look, I mean, you could say like for administrations, in the modern campaign finance era, or even before the modern campaign finance, maybe even more so before the modern campaign finance era, when there are all these rules about disclosure and limits on donations. But like presidents and their administrations have granted preferential access to deep-pocketed donors and corporations that
Then
can
we
put
have
money.
to take a break now for our radio audience. We'll be back right after this message with our online viewers. This is Deadline DC. My guest is Ken Vogel from the New York Times. Welcome back
Would you
to
notice
Deadline
an 8-year-old
DC
girl
with
who's not
Brad
excited
Bannon.
for summer
I'm
break
Brad Bannon.
because she made
My guest is Kenneth Vogel, an investigative reporter from the Washington Bureau of the New York Times and the author of a great book on corruption in American politics, The Devil's Advocates. Ken, always great to have you on the show. Ken, the first time we had you on the show, you had just released your new book, The Devil's Advocate, which I found a very good book, but also very disturbing. Uh, Let me ask you this question. You've been covering the intersection of money and politics for 20 years, first for at least 20 years, first for Politico and now with the New York Times. Is this getting worse, or has it just always been this way?
Well, yeah, as I was saying, there's long been a sort of pay for access type of dynamic that has loomed over American politics, or maybe undergirded American politics is a better way to put it, where these big donors have been able, and deep-pocketed corporations have been able to get access to officials at the highest levels of government, including sometimes the president himself, to make their cases. That's always been sort of a subplot of American politics. What's different with the Trump administration is that President Trump, but both his willingness to actually take the meetings himself and then to act on the request of these donors in a way where it's not just pay for access, it's like pay for results. And we can, in so many different cases, see a direct through line from a donation to a meeting where something is pitched to a result where the government then takes a step, makes a policy or rescinds a policy that is something that the donor wanted. And so I do think that the transactionalism of the Trump administration is maybe on another level from that which we've seen before. And also there's like an element of like shamelessness about it, where they don't try to, like in the past, when in past administrations, when I found a pattern like this and I put it to either the donor or the corporation or the public officials or the public official spokespeople, they'll try to explain it away as like, oh no, like this was always something that we were going to do and the donations had nothing to do with it. In fact, they gave the donations to us because they agreed with our position, not because like they were giving it to us to change our position. With Trump, they don't really try to explain it. Sometimes the lobbyists or the donors themselves will say like, yeah, like Trump listened to us. We got to the table because we gave the money and Trump listened to us and was willing to like make these changes. And the Trump administration doesn't seem to look down on that. In fact, they see it as like a sign of their effectiveness, that they're essentially like getting these deep-pocketed interests to come and genuflect almost before Trump, give the money and then make their case. And he is as they all
And I'm
stress,
going
like,
to have to rudely interrupt you again because we've got to take a break to bring back our radio listeners. I'm Brad Bannon. This is Deadline DC, and my guest is Kenneth Vogel from the New York Times. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. My guest in this half hour is Kenneth Vogel, an investigative reporter for the Washington Bureau of the New York Times and the author of a great book, The Devil's Advocates. Ken, let me ask you one more question about the book before we move on. Oh, and by the way, I want to welcome back, our radio listeners. If you enjoy Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and you want to watch us as well as listen to us, you can watch us at x.com/at Brad Bannon, at facebook.com/deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos, and at youtube.com/at deadline DC. Ken, uh, in your book, The Devil's Advocates, one of the people you feature is Hunter Biden Jr., son of former President Biden, who has horrifyingly, in my opinion, especially after reading your book, returned as a influencer for the Democratic Party. Um, what do you make of this development? I can't believe this is going to help Democrats at all with Hunter Biden after his financial wheeling and dealing during his father's presidency to be back in the limelight again.
Yeah, I'll say a couple things on Hunter. First off, is that we always sort of understood that he was biting his tongue and that he was, in some ways not effectively, but being controlled by, his father's political operation. They didn't want him out there, and he mostly acceded to their wishes. There were certain times when he did pop his head up and give interviews that often did not redound to the benefit of Democrats or his father. They were, sort of embarrassing, as you're intimating here. Number two is so now that he is sort of unshackled, as it were, and there's no reason for him to bite his tongue. He doesn't feel any allegiance to the Democratic Party. In fact, he feels the opposite. He feels disloyalty from Democrats because he feels that they pushed his dad out, and now he is seeking his vengeance in some ways, and exercising his right to free speech, to be more charitable about it. Number two is that he like just he continues to try to draw this equivalency with the Trump folks and the Trump family. It is true that the Trump family has like more successfully monetized the presidency, including the Trump kids. But I would just say, like, it was not for lack of trying. Like, Hunter Biden did really try to make huge business deals with foreign interests while his father was vice president, foreign interests who wanted to influence his father and thought that bringing him on board would be an avenue to do just that. We're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars, dealings with the Chinese, with like interests that are not necessarily aligned with those of the US. So Hunter likes to say, well, all I'm doing is doing paintings, and I was on the board of this Ukrainian company that was trying to like do right by Ukrainian energy independence, and that's not really the full story. I'm not trying to like say that like he was doing worse than, he was trying to capitalize worse than the Trump kids, but he was kind of doing the same thing and just wasn't very good at it.
Okay, let's go to another topic. You've written extensively over the last years about the Trump pardon industry. Now, last week, Donald Trump used his presidential policies to let off a former Republican member of Congress who was convicted of insider trading. Could you talk about the Trump pardon industry?
Yeah, I mean, this has become one of Trump's favorite levers to pull. He really likes to exert executive authority in a way that is sort of personal and like where people are, beholden to him. They are sort of making their personal pitches to him for something. And a pardon or a commutation is the type of thing that he can do without any other, branch of government, any other public official, any check on his authority. He can do that, and he enjoys doing it, and he uses it to make political points. But he's also doing it in a way that is sort of I won't say easy, because not easy, but it is like predictable, like how he can be manipulated. So many of the people who have won clemency from him have pitched their cases and their causes as sort of parallel to his grievances. In other words, they've said, like, I too, just like you, sir, have been the victim of a politicized Justice Department coming after me. In some cases, they say, because I am an ally of yours, or because I did something that the Democrats didn't like. And so you see an industry that has developed of well-connected lawyers and lobbyists who have the ability to both understand like what Trump wants to hear in these pardon pitches, and then get access to him to bring these pitches to him. And he has shown a willingness to grant them, and that has made sort of experts on the clemency process and the history of it quite uneasy and even outraged, because they see this as like an abrogation of the way that the clemency process should work and rewarding people who deserve a second chance. But the other effect of the way that he's approached this is to help make a sort of group of influence agents and lobbyists and lawyers around him quite wealthy, because the fees that they can charge for this type of service are huge, because this is such a valuable commodity, being able to get someone out of jail or out of the crosshairs of an investigation or to wipe their record clean. That's something that very wealthy people are willing to pay a lot of money for, and they're paying it.
And, you know, I think I read in one of your articles, I mean, we're talking these middle men and women are getting paid millions of dollars to get these pardons for their clients, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. And you know, there are people who are making a lot of money off this without really a proven track record of being able to deliver. And that, I think, has made, you know, these clemency experts and traditionalists even more uneasy, that like, sure, like there's, you know, only a certain number of people are going to be able to like plunk down that money. And it's not like saying that like, you know, they deserve to, you know, have an effective like clemency broker on their side. You know, really, it should be open to anyone, regardless of how much money you have. But the fact that there are people who have that money and are paying that money, sometimes they don't have like a ton of money, and they're cobbling it together or taking loans or getting their family members to give them that money to pay a broker who really has no ability to deliver on what they're promising, and it's just money down the drain.
Ken, thank you very much for joining us today on Deadline DC. Our guest has been Kenneth Vogel, who is an investigative reporter at the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. He's also the author of a great book called The Devil's Advocates about corruption, financial corruption in Washington, D.C. And if you haven't read it yet, I strongly urge you to go out and get it. Our guest in the next half hour, after we take a quick break, is Ethan Rome, who is the executive director of the Emergency Campaign to Support Higher Education. We will be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon right after this break. So don't go anywhere. We have plenty of good stuff to come. So take a quick break and be right back with us.